There's something strange going on with Anthony Albanese. The everywhere and nowhere man landed in Western Australia today on the third part of his quasi-non-official election campaign, a Cobra in hand, shirt on, like the man from Snowy River going on a tour of the regions. But it seems the regional heir has perhaps gone to his Cobra, from snapping at journalists.
Will you take responsibility if there's no interest rate cut before the election?
The Reserve Bank is responsible for interest rates.
But your policies impact what the
Reserve Bank is responsible for interest rates.
It's time for you to concede that your pledge to reduce electricity prices by $275 by this year, for whatever reasons, that's not going to happen. Is that fair?
Well, one of the things that we did, of course, was have a $300 energy bill relief.
That's not my question, in fairness.
That was the coalition.
The $275...
I know that, but you get to do the questions, I get to do the answers. That's the way it works.
Prime Minister, you're using the slogan, Build Back Better. Did you pinch that from President Joe Biden?
We're not. That's not our slogan.
And from that to obsessing over Peter Dutton.
Peter Dutton doesn't have a plan for the future. Peter Dutton's policies come with one word: no. Peter Dutton's out there being negative and being critical of. Peter Dutton has opposed everything that we've done.
But this next comment is truly baffling. In fact, I think it really takes the cake. Anthony Albanese has told the Australian newspaper he is, quote, better placed than Peter Dutton to forge a productive relationship with Donald Trump, arguing his close ties with Indo-Pacific leaders would be valuable to the US president-elect in an era of competition between major powers. What? I mean, you've got to laugh, don't you? And look, let's think about this for a moment. Do you seriously think a successful businessman like Donald Trump needs to hold the hand of the handsome boy from Australia to forge ties with leaders? I mean, Trump has met with the North Korean leader and the Russian president. This man fears no one. So what does Anthony Albanese think he could possibly bring to the table? And what does he think he actually has in common with a leader like Donald Trump? Because we already know what he thinks of him.
How do you deal with Trump?
With trepidation.
Yeah, but how do you get by? How do you temper your language?
Well, you've got to deal with who was elected. So we have an alliance with the US. We've got to deal with him. But that doesn't mean that you're uncritical about it. He scares the shit out of me. And I think it's of some concern that the leader of the free world thinks that you can conduct politics through 140 characters on Twitter.
Now, does that really sound like a man who is best placed to forge a relationship with the next president of the United States? Because come January 20, we will find out why Albanese is so scared of Trump. So I'm going to debunk Albo's claims in his one-on-one interview with the Australian newspaper and tell you why I believe he's actually the worst person to forge a relationship with the incoming president. Firstly, it starts with policy on China. The Prime Minister said he would not change his approach with China if Mr Trump lauded a trade war, lauding the reopening of trade with Beijing as an economic win for Australia. We are a sovereign nation and we will act in terms of our economic interest. And sure, we have to act in our own economic interests. But has the Prime Minister forgotten that our most powerful ally is the United States? Trump talks tough on China. He's announced plans to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese imports because of Beijing's inadequate efforts to curtail the fentanyl trade. He's repeatedly argued that China has stolen US jobs and industries and taken advantage of the United States. Donald Trump will not be bullied by Beijing. He's not going to capitulate to China, and yet the PM spent this morning in Kununurra doing just that.
Now, on Christmas Day, the first export of lobsters left Australia on its way to China. As of a couple of days ago, there had been 565,000 kilograms of live lobster exported into China,
representing more than 70 separate consignments.
Now imagine the lost revenue in the last 4 years in the lobster industry from China's punitive trade sanctions on Australian goods. And do you think Donald Trump would respond like Albo did after a Chinese fighter jet dropped flares in front of an Australian helicopter, forcing it to take evasive action?
We have made very strong representations at every level to China about this incident, which we regard as unprofessional and unacceptable.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump would pass off a dangerous incident like that if it happened to an American chopper as some sort of whoopsie moment by the Chinese. So in this era of competition between major powers, as Albo mentioned, how will he seriously be able to balance fawning over China while trying to work with our biggest ally? Now, the next difference is on the issue of climate change. Despite Donald Trump vowing to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Accord and accelerate fossil fuel development, Albo said that it was Peter Dutton's lack of ambition on climate change that would diminish Australia's standing and reduce Canberra's geostrategic relevance. We have improved our relationship with the Pacific, he said. A precondition of credibility is action on climate change, and Peter Dutton's position on the Pacific and climate change is one where they'll all remember him joking about the impact of climate change on their countries. Well, first of all, Albo has done everything to suck up to the Pacific, donning his Pacific shirt and dancing his way through, throwing money at Papua New Guinea to the tune of $600 million for PNG to enter the NRL. So can you really see Donald Trump going to meet with a Pacific Island leader and thinking, oh, well, I better call Albo to draw on his experiences, perhaps ask him to come along and lead the dancing? Sorry, I mean the discussions. Trump, on the other hand, has pledged to terminate what he calls the Green New Scam and cut energy prices in half within 12 months. He's promised to end new wind farms, saying turbines litter the country and are like garbage in a field, and to immediately reverse President Biden's ban on offshore drilling along most of the US coastline in an effort to bolster American-made energy. Yet we're stuck with Albo, who's sending us broken backwards on a green energy fantasy which is already buckling and sending electricity prices skyrocketing. And now to my final point. Albanese says he is better placed to forge close ties with the incoming administration, despite the coalition raising concerns about Albo and several cabinet ministers' previous strong criticisms of the president-elect. But Albo claims the relations he has forged would carry weight with Mr. Trump. Well, how much weight does this relationship carry?
The United States in the last 4 years has been run by a village idiot.
I think the general consensus amongst anyone concerned with the public policy process, domestic or international, thinks he's nuts.
So it brings me to my third point, the elephant in the room, Kevin Rudd. And as we know, that was just the start of Rudd's tirade. He called Trump a traitor to the West, the most destructive president in history. It went on before he annihilated his keyboard, deleted all the evidence of his negative social media posts, only when Trump was re-elected. It was Anthony Albanese's decision to appoint his mate and former boss, Kevin Rudd, as ambassador, despite those comments. So while Rudd puts his feet up in Queensland over the summer and takes time out with his cats, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison scored a ticket to Mar-a-Lago from Donald Trump himself for New Year's celebrations. No invite for poor old Kevin. In fact, Johannes Leek in The Australian summed it up perfectly in his cartoon. Rudd could only dream of being invited, and I'm sure there was no mistake. Now, Peter Dutton has hit back this afternoon at Albo's relationship building with the United States, saying it's comical for him to now say, trust me with the US relationship, when his own government has split with the USA on key votes at the UN. And we've seen little evidence of him engaging and influencing the incoming Trump administration in the national interest, which is a real concern. It sure is laughable for Albo to think he's some sort of big player, don't you think? Or even a big negotiator on the world stage. It's embarrassing. Albanese has no international credentials. He's Trump's puppet. He's not the one pulling the strings. And I would love to know who Trump would prefer to lead Australia, and I doubt it's China's handsome boy.